This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on GST measures and initiatives for economic growth. The participants are Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, economic analyst, and Shishir Sinha, journalist.
GST Council is scheduled to hold twin meetings. First one will take place on August 27th with single agenda of discussing mean for compensation to states, and second one is scheduled to meet on September 19 with multiple agenda including rate rationalization. Shubhamoy, within 4 years of its implementation, the new indirect tax system is facing tough taste in terms of its role in economic growth. How do you see challenges before GST administrator as of now?
Shishir, as I can see right now, this year, in addition to the usual problems that a new tax system imposes, the bigger problem has become because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that has created its own ramifications, its own pressures on the tax structure, and other was, of course, the existing problems. So together, it is quite a challenge for the tax administration to handle at this stage. If we break it down, what was the existing challenge already? That the tax system had led to rise in taxes, but not as buoyantly as it was estimated. And that had made it a difficult position for the center, that it had to create dip immediately into the compensation regime for the state. And that in turn was led by the fact that the tax structure of GST was made right from the beginning on a very conservative note. That instead of trying for, say, two-rate dual structure, there were more than one taxes, and there was lots of plus. There was also set-offs for petroleum, for electricity and others, which made the base tough in terms of the fact that it was narrow and also didn't give it the dynamism that was needed. So these are already there. This year, in addition to these problems, the problem has come along that the entire economy is facing a huge crisis. So even from whatever was available, the collection sources have come down. So together, this creates the current set of challenges to which the GST Council is planning to meet on 27th and then later again in September to try to sort out through some of those challenges.
Do you think that the time has come for GST 2.0 with more simpler and leaner structure? Leaner structure means lesser number of rates. There has always been a criticism that we have so many rates. If we talk about 1%, then 0.25%, then 3%, then 5%, 12%, 18%, 28%. So do you think that the time has come for reducing the tax slabs and also going for more simpler version of tax regime?
That is always a useful idea, to have a simpler tax regime and for having a few rates, because it makes tax administration so much more simpler. In fact, to take an example from the income tax department, from the time that they had started reducing the rate, their buoyancy had risen. In fact, one of the reasons why today the tax department says that both in income tax as well as in corporation tax, in a year like this, when collections have actually not fallen off as badly as in production, is because of the fact that the rates have been simpler. So it's been difficult for people to evade taxes. In the case of GST, so therefore there is a very good reason that the rates should be few. While that is from the administrative point of view, from the individual assessees, there are very few assessees who can say that they are forced to be there at multiple rates. So there the problem is not that the rates are too many for them. In fact, the rates have come down far substantially from what it was earlier. But the fact that the GST is still not tracking tax collection as well as it should be. So yes, we need to make the tax system more stronger so that it can catch the defalcation in taxes.
From an ordinary person, the most important issue is the rate in GST. As on today, we have 480 items in nil or 5% tax rate, 221 items at 12%, 607 in 18%, and only 29 items are in the 28% rate. Since implementation, rates have been reduced on almost 400 items in good category and 80 items in services category, and benefit of rupees 1 lakh crore was given. Do you see any scope of further reduction? I must put up a disclaimer here that the kind of tax collection we have, talking about reduction is a very, very dangerous thing. So what do you say about that?
Exactly. And you have pointed out the challenge right at the beginning. Reducing rates is a fraught exercise at this moment. Look at it from the common man's point of view. One of the big challenge that was thought about from GST was that GST will lead to an inflation. In the 4 years that we have had GST, no analyst report has come out to show that GST has led to inflation in prices. So definitely that challenge has been faced head on. Now, would the reduction in tax rates lead to reduction in prices? Well, yes, even in a period like this, it is always better when we know that there is a challenge in terms of raising the collection. It is probably a good idea to experiment with reduction in rate. It is possible that the dynamism that this will impart might give us more taxes. So in short, to put it simply, if there are lower rates, maybe people at the margin will feel that it is not worth evading the tax. It's worth paying the tax, and therefore from the same base there can be a larger tax collection. It is definitely an experiment worth doing.
And there is an argument which many people say that if you reduce the tax rate, it will be a win-win situation for industry as well as the consumer, and the demand will get a boost. But there is another argument which says that if we talk about GST rate reduction, only 5 to 10% prices will come down. Remaining 95% or 90% has to be paid by the consumer, and where he or she is facing a problem. So do you buy this argument that GST rate cut will certainly lead to a boost in demand?
At this stage, the boost in demand will come only when the COVID pandemic eases up. That is certainly the case for practically every possible sector. Where there has been a boost in demand has been because of factors which have got to do with people shifting to different types of consumption behavior and so on. So GST rate cut per se, you're absolutely right, will not lead to a boost in demand at this particular time. But what it will do is that for businesses will find it difficult to reason and to argue that it is worth evading the lower rate of tax and paying the cost of it rather than going ahead and paying the tax at the lower rate. So I definitely do believe that there is a ground for quite a few of the rates to be reorganized and rescheduled and to be made simpler, because that would definitely ensure that there is far less complaint about tax being complicated or an inverted duty structure and so on and so forth, the usual problems that one argues about.
Now, coming to compensation cess. Technically speaking, there are just 29 items which can help in raising additional revenue. Which one you think is the easy target? Do you support raising cess on tobacco?
Well, I would say this way, that the cess is more sinned against than sinning. The cess definitely gives the center a flexibility, and the cess does definitely on different goods have different histories. But again, to the compensation formula itself, and there I step back a minute onto the compensation issue itself, the 14% rate of growth which was assured. Is it that the states have to be compensated irrespective of any condition that the center finds itself in? I don't think so. The law definitely, as it is written, does not say so. It says the center will compensate, but it doesn't also say emergency condition. It also doesn't rule out an emergency condition. So definitely the center has an exception built in to be able to ensure that it doesn't have to pay the compensation cess. In fact, if you look at it, what the center has done is that it has actually, for the last year's compensation, it has paid the full amount. And in this year, whatever was there pending, instead of the usual tracking percentages of every year, they have actually got more than what they got last year. So what the center has done is it has actually gone ahead and it has not overcompensated, but it has cleared up the backlog of last year's quite substantially. Now, in that sort of a case, the center will say that I have done my bit of it, and therefore now, if the collections itself are low, then instead of railing against the fact that we should still be compensated, the center will say that this is about the maximum that we can do. And the rest of it, the states will then have to basically go out into the markets and borrow. In fact, the big challenge is that the states are saying that I have the option to either to go to the market and borrow, or I get a free support from the center, but after center having paid off that amount of money and being under not strictly under the compulsion to pay off the compensation cess to the extent that is demanded under the constitutional arrangement, the center can say that in a difficult year, you have to borrow more. And the states have to borrow more, and as we are seeing from the results of the RBI auction, that the states are in comfortable position. There was a scare that the borrowing costs will soar, that they will not be able to afford it, but that's not the case.
Do you think that when the state is going to borrow, the real issue is that how they are going to repay that? Because at the end of the day, it needs to be repaid. So the kind of fiscal situation all the states have, they have already been allowed to go for borrowing up to 5% fulfilling certain conditions. And there are, I believe, 7 to 8 states which are in a position that over and above, are they in a position or will there be any kind of situation when they will borrow, then there will be a repayment issue? How you resolve this issue?
Repayment is a difficult challenge, and definitely the state's fiscal constraint is far lower than what the center has. So there is always a room for readjusting those. Though, let's look at it in another way. The states have to repay the loan, but then for any prudent organization which is repaying a loan, the rule is to ensure that you run your household prudently. To their credit, the states have actually stayed within the fiscal deficit constraints that had been set by the 14th Finance Commission. And they had been keeping their fiscal deficit to within 3% and revenue deficit nil. In fact, it's been better than the center. But having said that, why are then the states scared that they will not be able to repay? The borrowing that they're doing is within the mandate, within the limits that has been set by the Finance Commission after having looked at their financial condition. Do we expect the COVID-like conditions to continue next year? No, we don't. In that condition, why should the states feel that they will not be able to repay, given that the Finance Commission thinks that this is an adequate room for them to be able to keep to their borrowing limits?
And of course, this borrowing, especially when we are talking about compensation, that is to be borrowed against what we are going to have under the compensation cess. So borrowing under normal situation and borrowing for compensation, these are the two different things, if I understand correctly. Shubhamoy, do you think that the time has come to revisit the act which says that the 14% growth rate has to be compensated? I mean, any income below 14% has to be compensated. So do you think that the time has come to revise this particular provision?
Well, yes, but at the same time, the center will not find the state's fellow travelers. Remember, the voting percentage in the GST is that the center has 33% and the states rest. And so far, the states have, most of the time, the voting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there has never been a need for voting. It has been
unanimous. Yeah, there's just one voting that on the GST on lottery.
Right. Now, if that is the case, if this one is put up to vote with the center and the states, it's obvious which way it will go. The point is that they would rather go in for not changing the compensation formula. And as the current year shows, the center has found adequate leeway within the percentage to be able to say that I have done my bit of it, and then that's what it stays. And unless, of course, some state takes this to the Supreme Court for a constitutional challenge, which is eminently possible, but so far nobody has shown the inclination, I don't think this is under serious threat. So why should percentage be tinkered with? Because most probably the percentage change proposal will not go through. That is my sense. And rather it will create more ill will. And as we found that the center has been able to stay within the limit and yet get away by not reaching that percentage.
Now, what next you can expect from the GST Council? Obviously, one is the compensation. So do you think some more measures, some more compliance relief to be given from the next meeting?
Certainly. And one of the things that one hopes that comes along is that the states and the center agree that all the checks that the GST was supposed to bring in terms of the e-way bill and others, which were supposed to ensure that the GST works as GST and not just not additional, but a tax just to replace state excise and sales tax. That work, that every time somebody pays a GST, somebody else's account is also measured up. And that is the reason why GST is so good, that it acts as a sort of a check against each other, every business. That role is now given more importance. States and center have to both agree that they cannot get away from this particular role of the GST. That is something very important, because calls for buoyancy will never come unless this particular aspect is passed through threadbare.
Thank you, Shubhamoy.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on GST measures and initiatives for economic growth. The participants were Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, economic analyst, and Shishir Sinha, journalist. This program is produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our website newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.